All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday, August 10th meeting of Kubernetes SIG Service Catalog. Aaron, take her away.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. So the regular announcements, the document for our agenda is in both Slack in our channel, and now I added it a second time to the Zoom chat for those who just joined. Jorge Castro from the Kubernetes community team works at Heptio. He has graciously joined us again today. Thanks, Jorge. George, my bad. I'm very sorry. I always do that. Thanks again for joining us a second day. He's going to take notes again graciously. Be on your best behavior, please. Maybe he'll come back for a third day sometime. That would be great.
That would be great.
So just as a recap, speaker queue, put a plus hand into the chat if you've got something you want to add to the conversation, just like that. George, when you're ready, can you share your screen? And if you are an attendee today, you hear what I just said, that means you're here as an attendee. Can you write your name if it's not already there under the attendees section under August 10th, 2017? That would be very helpful to all of us. So with that, George, I'll wait for you to share your screen and then we can get started.
No, we definitely don't want to read that stuff. Hold on one second. There we go.
Alrighty.
Sorry about that.
No problem. It wasn't anything too top secret, I hope.
No, not really.
Okay. Cool. All right. So we've got the first item. Doug, you are going to talk, it looks like, about a face-to-face. So why don't you summarize that, and we'll open up the floor to the speaker queue when you're done. Go ahead, Doug.
So start off with an easy one. Just wanted to know if there was interest in us trying to get together for a face-to-face meeting at the CNCF Kubecon in Austin in December, because if so, we should probably look to organize a room. So just want to see if there's enough consensus that we want to actually go forward with that.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody on the call think it's a bad idea?
George, you might want to mute or get a different keyboard.
All right, not hearing any objection, I guess we should look for a room. Does someone want to take the AI to ping the organizers to see if we can get a room? If not, I don't know.
I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Other comments, questions about this section before we move on? This one was a pretty easy one. Thanks for starting us off with that, Doug.
Always.
All righty. The next one is issue number 994, proposal from Doug on separating the OSB and PodPreset sections of binding. Doug, why don't you go and summarize that before we open up the floor?
Right, so this issue is actually opened up by Paul, but I believe that based on previous discussions where we agreed to pull out the PodPreset stuff from the binding, and that we agreed to resolve exactly what kind of PodPreset type of thing we're going to create after beta. I believe on this one, I'm not looking to close the issue or anything like that. I'm just looking to get agreement that we want to move this particular issue out of 010 to a milestone. And this, just to be clear, this issue is all about creating the replacement for PodPresets. You know, I think Paul actually suggested a PodPreset binding type resource, but we don't need to get into what the decision is in terms of what the resources look like. It's just, I think we made the decision, we're going to make that decision after beta, so I'm just looking for consensus that we want to move this to be a post-beta issue.
Okay. Not seeing anything from the speaker queue. Sunil, go ahead.
The only comment I have about this is, let's say if you want to make any progress on this item to thrash out the design and kind of the initial implementation before beta, so can this be added with a flag, guarded by a flag, this functionality? That's the because as per current plan, what we are hoping is that we'll have pod preset implementation as far as the API is concerned, also available in beta, but guarded by a flag so that people can try out. And this goes hand in hand. Having the integration with service catalog would also be important. And if we make progress on that, we should at least have some cycles from reviewers to review that during beta. So that's the comment I have.
All right, Paul, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
So I have a gut feeling that we are not going to have bandwidth to talk further about the design of pod preset binding.
Mm-hmm.
It is certainly, I definitely think that if we run out of things that we need design consensus on and finish the initial beta early, that at that time I'd be happy to talk more about pod preset binding. And I actually have some fairly detailed mental notes about this thing. So I was considering sketching out a detailed design on it next week while I'm going to be out. But I think for now we should concentrate on other matters.
Yeah, I agree. Concentrating on items which are needed for beta. So we are focusing to get pod preset in, but then what would happen is that you can have pod preset APIs, but the integration will not be in there. So if you want to get early feedback in beta timeframe for the pod preset stuff, which is probably fine, I think.
I think I may have misunderstood the suggestion. So it sounds like, Sunil, I think maybe some information is missing from your context. So we put, if I remember correctly, on the beta scope issue, mm-hmm. we put as a nice to have pod preset being present in service catalog API server.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's done, I have absolutely no problem releasing 0.1.0 with an alpha or beta pod preset that's moved over. I do think it should be guarded by a flag. I don't think we'll have any bandwidth for pod preset binding, like I just said, but I wonder, does that clarify things for you?
So how much would the pod preset be useful without the binding? That's the only thing I have.
Well, it would be useful for cases where people were trying it out and wanted to get an impression of how it worked just in a vacuum before they added any notion about what pod preset binding was, which I think would be useful. It would be useful for people that want pod preset but don't care at all about service catalog, as we know there are some people that fall into that category.
Yeah.
So I think it has use, and I don't see any reason not to release it if it's in a state that we think is good, especially if it's behind a flag.
Okay, I think
so we got some good context there. I wanted to go back to the queue. Doug has had his hand up for a while, so Doug, go ahead and take the floor.
Yeah, Sunil, I think there might be a little bit of miscommunication here. We're not looking to remove pod presets. Pod presets will still be there in 1.8, whether it sits in the Kubernetes core or our service catalog repo is still a little bit up for decision. It's probably going to remain where it is, but we're not looking to remove pod preset. The only thing we did is remove the pointer to a pod preset from the binding object. And What we're really deferring here is the notion of creating other pod preset type of resources to extend the functionality of pod preset. So your concern about pod presets not being there or not being available, that's not true. They will still be there. It's just we're not going to necessarily talk about them as a thing to use as part of the service catalog for the short term.
Got it. So I think, so as if we can get the design done by the beta time frame.
Sunil, I got to go back to the speaker queue. So I know you got stuff to say. Just put your hand up. No worries at all. Vile, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would be curious about, so my understanding matches exactly what Doug was saying, which is pod presets will be there, but there is no magic that Service Catalog provides for you. Is that true?
True, yes.
Right, so going from that, I would be curious how useful, and this is sort of kind of, it would be interesting to get some thoughts from some customers and whatnot, on how useful do we think it is, because I think the fact that they just get put into secrets is reduces the functionality quite a bit.
Okay, Doug, go ahead, take the floor.
Yeah, so Vile, I think we had a whole bunch of discussions on this while you were on vacation. And what I think it might be useful to do so that we don't spend too much time on this call is if you want, I can talk to you offline after this call to bring you up to speed on the conversations. And then if you want to, in essence, reopen that discussion, which I think is a valid thing because we want to make sure we get this right for beta. If you want to reopen that discussion, then we can add it to the next design call to talk about whether we want to reverse the decision or change our decision slightly. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. I guess what I'm saying is that, okay, I'm shutting up.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
So I think that we should retain focus on things that we've already agreed are in scope, and we've already talked about there are definitely use cases for people wanting to have pod presets available to use, even if they don't care at all about service catalog. And I think the name of the game here is iteration, and after we solve some of these other more pressing matters, I think it will probably be pretty easy to figure out what to do with pod preset, especially if I can take some of my copious spare time and write a detailed design document. So I could foresee it being actually quite, as far as things go, relatively speaking, on the simpler side, to implement an integration after we've done an initial beta release. EOF.
So we have, I believe, a consensus, and George has written that down. This is out of scope for beta. We will revisit it post-beta. Now I will ask, does anybody disagree with that consensus? Going once? Okay. I believe we can move on now. We are now going to move on to use generation instead of checksum to detect change in the spec, issue number 1095. Doug, why don't you go and summarize that for us, and then we'll open up the floor.
Okay. I just pasted a link into the chat. So again, I think this issue was opened by Paul, if I'm remembering correctly. And I believe on the August 7th meeting, we did sort of talk about switching from checksum to generation. And my general sense was that we were all kind of in agreement that that mechanism is already there in core, so we might as well reuse it. But I don't think we actually formally agreed to that because it was all discussed within the context of, I think, one of your issues, Aaron. I can't remember exactly which one it was. I might have been relisting. So what I want to do is to bring it back up to make sure that we're in agreement as a group on that general direction. And then if Paul does have a formal proposal, we can talk about it now. But if he didn't, then I would at least want to get that general consensus going forward. And then on a future call, we could talk about a concrete proposal if Paul had it.
Cool. Paul, go ahead, take the floor.
So I have a write-up that shows exactly what we should do. There are some special cases that for broker, for example, I've written up broker. I haven't finished writing up instance, but I'd be happy to talk through it now. I think it would take maybe about 10 minutes to go through the general mechanics of checksum and at least say why it will work for broker and binding, with the additional bonus challenge of if I can mentally write the rest of the special things for instance, I can probably talk that out as well. How do people feel about that?
Any objections to spending 10 minutes on this? Please verbalize them with the speaker queue if you have them. Go ahead, Vilay.
Yeah, I haven't seen the proposal yet, and if I'm the only one who hasn't read it, that's fine. I would rather read it, and then look at the different pointers to it first, so that then I can ask questions. Or if it looks good, then I would rather see the doc first and read it, and then read about generations.
Okay, so are we okay then with waiting a day or maybe till next week? Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, how about this? How about a sort of a compromise? Why don't we go through the other agenda items that have concrete proposals sort of written down already? And if we get through all those and we basically have extra time, then we can go and do Paul's brain dump then.
Paul, go ahead.
The proposal that I have written is 6 lines long. For special considerations for brokers, it's an additional 16 lines. Does that change anything for anybody?
Aaron, go ahead. This is Aaron speaking now. I'm going to propose that we have, I believe this was proposed by Doug in the chat. Yeah. I'm going to propose that we do a 10-minute Thunderdome, so to be ended by 31 minutes after the hour. And whatever we can get through in 10 minutes, great. Then, Paul, you come back with a concrete proposal in a future design meeting for us to go over and continue digesting, and that's it. EOF from me. Any responses, reactions from that, please put them into the speaker queue. Go ahead, Paul.
So I'm going to be out next week, and I'd strongly prefer not to have to dial in. I think this is an important thing to talk through. I'd love the chance to be able to talk through it today, but if folks would rather see something in writing first, I'm happy to do that.
All right, so we've got one person requesting something in writing first. I have heard another person, in addition to you, Paul, say that we should do it now. I can't make the decision for you guys, so either we do it or we take a vote. If we have to take a vote, we have to take a vote. Okay. Please write in the chat a plus hand, or excuse me, a plus vote if you want to hear it now. 10-minute Thunderdome. Got 2 votes for. Any other votes? 3 votes for. 4, 5, 6. All right. 6 votes for. Votes against. Please write plus vote for voting against doing this right now for 10-minute Thunderdome. Going once. All right. 6 votes for, 0 votes against. Paul, you have 10 minutes. Here's the timer. You may start whenever. I'm starting the timer now. You are muted also.
All right. I will start by putting into a comment on this issue just the basic mechanics of using generation so that people can see what I'm talking through. Oops. And it's the proposal so nice, I pasted it twice. So I'll just clean that up. All right. So the proposed changes that I suggest, oh, and by the way, so for context, generation is a field on object meta. It is not user settable. And it is basically maintained by the API server. So the basic idea of generation is that as the spec of an object changes, the API server will bump the generation on an update. Now, that doesn't include status, and it doesn't include annotations or labels. It's just the spec. And the pattern that resources in Kubernetes use this field in is when they have finished reconciling a particular status, or I'm sorry, a particular version of the spec, a particular generation of the spec. I will get to your comment, Doug. One sec. They can use that value in a status field to say, I have done the work for this generation. And so that allows the controller to implement a check to see, do I need to actually do any more work for this thing? So the specific changes that I propose that we make to adopt generation are to remove the checksum field from the broker instance and binding status and all the associated checksum calculation code, stuff in the strategy that maintains the checksum, et cetera, and add code to the REST strategies to increment the generation field in the object meta when the spec is changed. Then add a new field to broker instance and binding status called reconcile generation that the controller will set to be the value of generation currently on an object when it is going to set the resources ready condition to have status true. So to talk through an example of this, say that for broker, we add a new broker. The generation has a value of 0. We reconcile that broker successfully on the first try and set the ready condition to be true and set the reconciled generation to be 0. So if nothing else happens to that object, the next time the controller sees it, it will do a check that says, hey, reconciled generation and generation of this object match. I have nothing else to do. Done. When you change the broker's spec, the API server will increment generation on that object. And when the controller gets a watch event for it, it'll say, hey, the reconciled generation and the current generation of this object don't match. I have work to do.
Okay. Paul, you came in very light. Thank you for that.
I reserve the remaining time to interrupt and bypass the speaker queue.
That's not going to happen, but do you have anything else you'd like to include in this design explanation?
Now, I do, and I'm going to address, so Doug, I think I have addressed your comment. Maybe Doug, you can just put plus Doug in the chat if I have addressed your question.
I'll wait for my spot on the queue.
All right.
Okay. So Nal says it might not work only if there is some field in the spec irrelevant to Open Service Broker. Then we still need a checksum to know whether we need to invoke Open Service Broker request. I think that I do not think that you are wrong, but I do think that all of the fields that we should allow to change should, in this nucleus of resources that are just for Open Service Broker, should all meet the criteria of they have some effect that makes sense in Open Service Broker API. So I don't think that you are wrong, but I don't think that we will have such a field. And let me call out specific counterexamples here. So reference to a secret and secret. Okay, so I think what we're talking about is you're thinking about a flow where we've supported parameter updates, and there's a secret that holds the source of parameters. Now I have this is the part that I did not get to write down. I think in the case of parameter updates, and we run a chance of getting into the weeds, but I think in the case of parameter updates, there is a convention on deployments, or there's precedent on the deployment resource to have a field in the spec that's called pause, that when you set that field, it means that the controller won't do any more work until the field's unset. And I think that instead of monitoring secrets for changes or pulling secrets for changes, especially until we have a bulk watch capability that we can use, which we don't right now, that we could just drive all of the updates, whether they're in band in the spec of an instance or out of band in a secret. I see it, Aaron. Thank you very much.
So, Paul, I want to say, since this isn't written in a design document, I've gotten some comments that it should be written before we go. I'm going to give you the rest of your 2 minutes. I'll actually give you a couple extra seconds to make up for my talking, but then we got to move on to the speaker queue.
All right, let's go to the speaker queue.
All right. Vile, you're up next. Go ahead.
So it seems like this concept of a reconciled generation, if we are going to use that and every resource that we reconcile basically gets added, strongly suggests to me that it belongs in the type meta where generation goes as well. Should we think about a possibility of upstreaming this?
Do I get to respond to that without raising my hand, or I don't know how the rules work right now?
Yeah, Doug's next in the queue, so go ahead, Doug.
Well, I was assuming that Paul, as the presenter, would get to respond, but okay. So this question is kind of based upon the conversation we had a couple of days ago around Aaron's issue. For those resources where the user may need to force a resync, Paul, are you envisioning some sort of /sync type of URL like we talked about in the previous issue to be available for people to force the resync to happen?
All right, so Paul, you're next in the queue. Why don't you go ahead and answer all these questions?
Okay, so I think that for broker, I will next put in what I've written up for broker. And it's very quick. Basically, special considerations for broker are that we do need to support a manual resync. And so what I have spoken about with Jordan Liggett, who's one of the folks that works on API machinery stuff at Red Hat, is we could have a field on the broker spec, and I've updated the issue with this comment. We could have a field on broker spec that was the number of relist requests, and a user could just bump that either by editing the resource, or we can have a porcelain command that does it for you, and we would actually not need to have a new sub-resource to do that. So that way we could just kind of ride on the the behaviors of when the spec changes, the generation changes. When the generation changes, the controller does work to handle the manual relist.
Okay. I am not seeing any other hands. Reactions to anything here? George, do you mind putting the notes back up? Thanks, George. All right. I'm going to put my hand up and ack it. So what I would like to see next, this also echoes, I think, what you just said as well, Doug. I think the next step would be Paul, write everything down in completion, and we will put this on the schedule ASAP. I know you're going to be gone next week, but I believe we're going to need to see this in full. That's it from me. Paul, you're up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can live with that. I do just want to say in the Kubernetes core, the fields that hold the status, the fields that hold the last generation you did work for are in the status. So I don't know that we would have traction moving them into object meta. And I think that if we did, we would certainly face an uphill battle on it. I think as far as what we should do for the initial beta, I think we should just add a field in the status, and I am totally fine writing this up in full. I regret that I was not able to finish a full detailed write-up before this meeting.
Cool. Okay, Vile, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I probably should have minus-handed it. I was going to say, so Nail said that there is something in the deployments already called something else, observed generation. But if we think it's never, ever going to go the object metadata, that seems goofy. If every controller needs to solve this problem, is this ad hoc, or how do people typically do this?
Okay. Doug, go ahead.
Do you want to let Paul answer that, or?
No, go ahead, Doug.
Okay. So, Paul, I'm assuming that before you'll vanish for vacation, you'll probably write up the full thing. Do you want us to wait until you get back before we have a formal discussion about it, or not?
I would be happy to have folks talk about it while I'm gone. I will write it up in full before Monday's meeting. I see where Vile is coming from. I don't think it will be actionable. And so I reiterate my position that I think that we should just do what the existing convention is. Though it may not be absolutely perfect.
So Paul,
well, I didn't get an answer. Do you want us to hold off on the decision or not?
What's the decision?
Well, if we talk about it while you're gone, are you okay with us deciding one way or the other, or do you want to be there for the decision?
So I view this as so fundamental, and that I don't think there's any decision but to do it. I think the question is the proposal explanatory enough? I realize that I am the person that introduced checksum, but hey, I did it wrong. I think that API review would be like, use generation. So I'm fine to spell it out in more detail, but I think that a vote against using generation is a vote against the existing conventions that will later require a migration when API review gets to this thing. So that's where I stand.
So I've once again handed an act myself in the confines of the speaker queue. I hope that's okay. Paul, the only thing I wanted to ask is when you write up the complete proposal, you address Vile's 3 questions in the chat. It says, how do other objects handle this? Number 1. Number 2, how does deployment do this? Number 3, why not push upstream if everyone has to do this?
Okay, can someone copy those into the agenda as an action item for me?
Yeah, George, do you mind doing that? Thanks. The 3 questions are at 1:37 p.m. from Vikas. That's Vile. Awesome. Thank you.
I added one more to the list at 1:39. Handle the secret issue that Neil brought up.
Cool. All right. So I am not seeing other hands. We've got an action item from Paul. We're going to discuss this once the agenda item is up. Excuse me, once the proposal is up, we'll put it on the agenda to discuss next week. Do we have any other comments, questions, objections, anything on this item before we move on? All right, not hearing anything. Going once. Okay. So next up is Doug with issue 818, sending the bind resources app GUID on each bind request to the broker server. Doug, why don't you give an overview of that, and then we'll open it up to the speaker queue.
Okie dokie. So I just pasted a link to not just the issue, but also the proposal that I put in there. So as background, right now when you do a bind request, there's an optional field called app GUID that is supposed to be obviously a GUID that's a pointer to the application that's trying to bind to the service. For right now, we actually send the namespace GUID in which the secret is going to be created because we didn't know what else to put, so we decided to put something there, and that seemed like as good as anything else. There's been the whole discussion about whether we should change that or not to something else. Well, I was thinking about it today, and with the decision to remove the PodPreset stuff from the binding, we've basically converted the binding resource into what we sort of called in the past the instance credentials object or something like that. Basically, we're reducing binding down not to a binding option or action anymore. Rather, the binding is just a way to say, give me the credentials and then stick into a secret. And then there'll be another step in the workflow, meaning like the PodPreset binding thing or whatever else, that would actually link things together. But from the service from the open source broker API's perspective, we really don't have a application at that point in time in the workflow to work with. And so what I think we should probably do going forward is exactly what we're doing now, which is just continue to send the namespace GUID into which a secret is going to be created, because that at least gives the service broker some sort of scoping mechanism, if it wants to use it, to make a determination about how to handle the binding request. And I think that's the most accurate thing to send. The only other option that I've heard mentioned is to send nothing at all, but I don't think that really helps the broker do its job if it actually does want to do some kind of logic based upon groupings or association of things. So my basic proposal is to do nothing and close this issue without any action, and just continue to send the namespace GUID for the app GUID.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
I think Doug answered my question. I'm very much in favor of doing nothing for now and closing this issue. And if someone can bring a concrete use case for why they need it, we can take it up after the initial beta, would be my suggestion.
Okay, Niall, hands up, go ahead.
My short question is just to clarify, what does this field affect in the broker, or why is it important for service catalog to put the right value there?
So the broker can choose to use this field or not. What I've seen in the past is sometimes brokers will look at this value and determine that the user is trying to bind, for example, the same application to the same instance and flag that. So sometimes he may return the exact same credentials as before, or he may just say, nah, that's fine, I'm going to return a different set of credentials because of what they want. I've seen other cases where they say, no, I'm not going to let you bind the same application twice. There's no concrete statement in the spec of what the broker's supposed to do with it, but those are some of the use cases that I've seen people talk about using it for.
Okay. Other questions, comments on this item before we move on? Going once. All right. The next item, Paul, you want to just explain very briefly what this item is? I see that you've said it's a 50-minute topic, so we can probably decide after you make your short explanation what to do at that point.
So I don't actually want to get into it. I think it's far too detailed to have a real discussion about, and I'd rather just wait and write everything down so that I can bring something that's packaged for everybody's digestion for them to read before we talk about it.
Great. All right, great.
So,
okay, we've got 15 minutes left. Sunil, I see that you are listed, PodPreset migration details is listed under a future topic. 1 second, Paul. Sunil, is that something that is appropriate to talk about now and something that you're prepared to talk about now?
I can give a quick update if people are interested.
Okay. So give me 1 second. Let me, let Paul take the floor for a second. He had his hand up, and then we'll move on. Go ahead, Paul. You're muted. You're muted.
I have gotten a response about a face-to-face, and Red Hat already has some rooms reserved the day before Kubecon. We have an OpenShift Commons gathering the day before Kubecon, as we always do. We already have rooms reserved for that day. So if we want space during Kubecon, I have somebody that can try to get some space for us. Why don't we do this? How about we have an action item? Think about which day you want to have a meeting. And either, I guess we could possibly do it after, although I'm not sure what level of interest in such a schedule would be, or how much energy there would be to execute it. So why don't we talk about this again on the Monday call, and folks can we can take a vote who wants to do it when, and I will get meeting space reserved at Kubecon.
Okay. George, you had a hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually at the project level, they have a spreadsheet because some people need to ascend multiple SIGs, and you kind of pencil yourself in for the day before so that certain people can attend certain SIGs. So I don't know when that's happening. I know the CNCF people who are organizing KubeCon tend to put on an announcement style thing. So just something to keep an eye out for.
So how about this? I'm going to just suggest I can put out a poll to the group right now. Give that an action item for me. Sorry to take over the queue. I just want to throw that out. Paul, go ahead. You can take the floor.
Yeah, I think good point, George. I think this channel that I have might afford us the chance for larger space and longer times. In the past, if I remember correctly, there have been like specific hours, and that's, a couple hours is not actually enough time to talk through very much in person. So we might be able to get like a 4-6 hour stretch of time this way. Just throwing it out there. I'm happy to do whatever folks want.
Alrighty. Okay, Sunil, apologies for cutting you off. We have 12 minutes left. Is it still appropriate to go over PodPreset?
So actually, I will then mention something which is more relevant to the audience here. So I did a work in progress PR for moving the APIs, and I ran into 2 issues, and which we can probably put it for the next meeting. One is, should the PodPreset have TPR storage at all or not, or it should just be etcd. So storage question came up in the PR. And second is the issue I ran into was what should be, so it is being developed under the group settings, and the group name is whatever is the domain name, which is settings.kates.io. It will conflict with the implementation in core Kubernetes. So that is another point that I want to resolve. What would be the group name when we start implementing it in service catalog? Will it be settings.servicecatalog.kates.io? So,
Okay.
so these two open questions, I can actually put them in a separate issue and we can discuss it there. And I'm also, quick update, I'm writing a proposal for the initializer, and I'll share it in the Slack channel after I'm done with it. Yeah, so that's pretty much the update from my side.
Cool. Thanks, Sunil. So real quick, we've got 10 minutes left. We're probably going to end up being able to take 2, maybe 3 more people in the queue. With that, Morgan, you got a hand up, so go ahead.
I'll just comment on the thing when we get there. That's fine. The issue.
Okay. Any other comments, questions on PodPreset and Sunil's work? Okay. Not seeing anything here. Going once. All right. Now I see a design issues needing concrete proposals. I'll just call out that these look like all issues that someone or some people need to write proposals for. If you have a proposal in mind, please go pick one of those issues up, write that proposal. That would be great. Besides that, we've got 9 minutes left. Does anyone have anything brief that they want to bring up? Please put a hand up if you do. Go ahead, Paul.
So if you would like to write a design proposal for something, please indicate on the issue that you're going to do so that we don't have duplicate work. We have very little time, so let's try to avoid duplication that ultimately wastes time.
Good point. Thanks for that. Okay. Haven't seen any other hands.
I have one more thing. I'm sorry I didn't put my hand up.
Okay, go ahead.
If you are interested in writing a design proposal, I ask that you ensure that you are able to take the task of getting consensus on the design to completion. So just throwing that out there.
So that would mean bringing it up in a design meeting. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah, and making requested changes or immediately handing it off if you have like a production blocker or something else you have to do, just so that in the interest of time, we can come to a speedy resolution on these things.
Okay. All right. With that, haven't seen any other hands. Looks like we're going to be able to get 8 minutes back. That looks like it. Great, guys. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. We are, I believe, not going to have a design meeting tomorrow. So that would mean Monday is the next time we all get together. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you on Monday.
I will send a link out in Slack when I have finished the complete write-up of generation.
See you, everybody.
See ya.